Bonjour, welcome to Wahsa Lesson Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is SVN3E, grade 11 workplace science, and I'm the teacher Bronwyn Slate. If you'd like to participate live today, you can call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen on the radio at 91.9 FM and also on the television at Bell Expressview channel 972. You are always welcome to join me live through the Zoom link, which is available from me, your teacher, and also from your DEC. Our classes are scheduled on Monday through Thursday from 10 to 11 in the morning, and we are in our second week of our 9-week course. We are just beginning, but it's still important to know what work you will need to submit for marking. So the key questions are listed at the end of each of your IL lesson, and they are the ones to submit for marking. So please do all of them. Some of them are check your understanding questions, some are activities, some are review questions. Explain your ideas and your thoughts in complete sentences. Give me all of your thoughts, and please make sure you're actually answering the question. You can do this either by hand or electronically. You are welcome to write in your workbook, but I don't really encourage it as it is a small space. So maybe making notes is fine, but to give your full complete answers in complete sentences, I would encourage you to write on a separate piece of paper. You can do your work electronically in either Word or Google Doc files are the ones that are easiest for me to access. But if you need to use a different file type, I'm sure it's fine. Just let me know so that we can try to open, I can make sure that I can open your files. Okay, so then how do you actually submit your work for marking? So the first is to send it, the first method out of 3 is to send it electronically. So if you've written it out by hand, you can scan your completed work using a device if you don't have a scanner, which many of us don't. So if you have an Apple device, the Notes app, which is free with your device, has a scan function, as well as the Android devices. The Google Drive app has a scan function. Again, both these apps are free and generally come with those devices. And then it's pretty straightforward to scan. And then it just makes one file that is generally fairly small and easy to send. If that doesn't work for you and you just want to send me pictures, that's okay. I can manage that. Just scanning it makes it a little bit easier. Then once you have scanned it, or taking pictures, send it to me either through email at studentwork@nnec.on.ca and CC it to bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca. Or you can also send it to me through Facebook Messenger, where my name is B Slate Wahsa. The second method is to drop your work off in Sioux Lookout. We have an outdoor mailbox at our location 74 Front Street. We're the bright red building next to the post office, and we have a small white mailbox next to our side entrance. We are not yet open to the public, but hopefully soon. So at this point, just put your work in that mailbox and I'll get it back to you as soon as I can. The third method is to hand your work into your DEC. Then your DEC can either send your work through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. Students are also welcome to send their work in by fax. If you have access to a fax machine, that's totally fine. If you'd like to connect with me through social media, both my Facebook and my YouTube channel are under the name B Slate Wahsa. So if you friend me on Facebook or subscribe to my YouTube channel, you'll get notifications every time I upload one of our videos. All of our radio Zoom classes are recorded and then I upload them to YouTube shortly after. And I put them in a playlist called SVN3E. So it's a really easy way to find all of our previous lessons, as well as the supplementary videos that I share in class. You can get them, most of them from their general, the original sources, so that you can connect with more information if you'd like. Science is really visual. I do my best to incorporate as many visuals as I can, as well as videos, graphs, charts. So I strongly encourage you to access the videos either by joining me live or by watching the replays on YouTube. If you don't have reliable internet and can't do either of those things, let me know and I can send you a copy of the recordings, which you then can watch offline. So if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out and contact me. My email address is bronwyn.slate, and that's spelled BRONWYN.SLATE at nnec.on.ca. My Facebook is bslate Wahsa. You can call me at the office at 807-737-1488, extension 2209, or also call us toll free at 1-800-667-3703. My office hours are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., though I teach from 9 till 11 in the morning. So that is not a good time to try to get a hold of me. However, if you leave me a message, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Or if that time does not work for you, which is understandable, then let me know and we can try to work out a time that would be more convenient to connect for both of us. All right, I think it's really important to position myself in the context of this course, as that shapes how I teach it and how I evaluate. So I am white. I have white settler ancestry. Sorry, I have white privilege. So that shapes the way that I have experienced education, both as a student and also as a teacher. So I work to disrupt that cycle of the fact that the education system is built to set me up for success and not necessarily other folks. So I'm constantly trying to engage in ways that disrupts that cycle and makes things more equitable and improves them for people who are not white, people of the global majority who are currently experience discrimination and oppression. I live in Northwestern Ontario on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people, and continuing to work to learn from this culture and these people and integrate those teachings into my classes. It is a long journey. I have not figured out very much about it yet. I am committed to continuing to do this work, but I want to do it respectfully and authentically, and that takes a bit of time. As an educator, I always have lots to learn and unlearn. Our system is seeped in racism and oppression, and so challenging those systems and barriers is something that takes a lot of reflection and learning. So I'm working to unlearn the systems of patterns that I have experienced and are ingrained within me, and learning how to new ways and new perspectives that I can integrate into my teaching. Our textbook also is Eurocentric. So it also is based from my perspective on the ways of knowing of white people and the scientists and experiences of white people. So it definitely ignores Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis knowledges and experiences, and this is definitely problematic and not a good representation of our student population, our communities, and just our in general, our world in general. So I am working to figure out how to address that and how to change that. But again, it is a process. If anyone has any suggestions, I welcome them and look forward to speaking to you about them. All right, so we are starting Unit 2 today in our science course, and this is maintaining healthy ecosystems. So healthy ecosystems clean our water, purify our air, and maintain our soil, regulate the climate, recycle nutrients, and provide us with food. We've talked about how the cycles of soil, air, and water all work and how humans impact them and how they are polluted. And so looking at healthy ecosystems figures out how they keep clean. They provide raw materials and resources for medicines and other purposes, and they are the foundation of all civilization and sustain our lives. It's that simple. We could not live without these healthy ecosystems, and not all the ecosystems are super healthy at this time. So this is looking at lesson 4 now in your workbook, which is cycling of substance in ecosystems. So our learning goals are that at the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the relationships among consumers, producers, and decomposers in typical ecosystems. And then you also will understand how human activities interferes with the cycling of substances in these ecosystems. So you know you've met learning goals because you can give examples of producers, consumers, and decomposers in both natural and human ecosystems. You can explain the negative impacts of human activities on ecosystems, and you can explain steps humans are taking to manage our impacts in more sustainable ways. All right, so ecosystems, what are we even talking about? So we're going to watch a video that gives us a bit of a definition of ecosystems and understanding them. It's not too long, I don't believe. Here we go. Hopefully it'll work for me today. Come on.
The earth is covered in living things. From very large organisms to the tiniest creatures, all living things on earth have one thing in common: they cannot survive alone. To grow and flourish, living things need the support of an ecosystem. An ecosystem is what we call all the things that interact in a specific area, both living and non-living. Ecosystems can be hard to define. They are interconnected in many ways, and it is not always easy to see where one ecosystem ends and another begins. Different ecosystems may look very similar or very different from one another, but all ecosystems are made of the same basic parts. Ecosystems have both living and non-living parts. The non-living parts of an ecosystem include things like sunlight and temperature, air and wind, the types and amount of water available, and rocks and soil. The living parts of an ecosystem are the plants and animals in it. The non-living parts of an ecosystem combine to create the conditions that will determine what kinds of living things will be able to survive there. You won't find a coral reef in the desert or cactus in the ocean because the conditions are wrong for them to live and grow. There are three main types of living things in an ecosystem: producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers produce or make their own food. Usually they make their food from sunlight through photosynthesis. Plants are the most obvious example of producers. Without producers, no animal would be able to survive. That's because all animals are consumers and need to consume or eat their food. Some animals called herbivores get their energy from eating plants. Other animals, called carnivores, get their energy from eating other animals. There is a third group of animals called omnivores. Omnivores get their energy by eating both plants and meat. Humans are an example of omnivores. Finally, there are the decomposers. Decomposers are generally bacteria and fungi. They consume dead plants and animals and break them down into nutrients that are released into the soil. These nutrients are used by producers like plants to help them grow, and the cycle begins all over again. The living things inside an ecosystem form a community. Within the community are many different populations. A population is made of all the members of one specific species. For instance, all of the plants and animals on the savanna make up the savanna community. Within the savanna, all of the zebras make up the zebra population. All of the acacia trees make up the acacia tree population. And all of the lions make up the lion population. All the parts of an ecosystem must work together to reach a balance that allows each of the members of the system to thrive. For example, in a balanced ecosystem, predators keep the population of rabbits from growing too large, because when there are too many rabbits, they eat too many plants. If rabbits ate too many plants, the plants would not be able to grow back fast enough, and other animals that need the plants would not have enough to eat. Without enough plants, the animals that depend on them for food would start to die, and the soil begins to erode or wash away, which makes it harder for new plants to grow in the future. Ecosystems can become imbalanced when something disrupts their normal workings. Anything from bad weather to diseases to an erupting volcano can disturb an ecosystem. Human activity can also damage the balance of natural ecosystems. By cutting down trees and clearing forests, building roads and cities, killing some animals, introducing new ones, or creating pollution, it can become impossible for the plants and animals in an ecosystem to grow and thrive. In most cases, ecosystems can recover and regain a healthy balance if given enough time and an opportunity to rest from whatever disturbed them in the first place. Since people rely on ecosystems for food and resources, it is important that we try to protect them. Fortunately, there are many ways to have a positive impact on your local ecosystem. By doing anything from picking up trash, planting a tree, conserving water and electricity, or creating a habitat for wild animals, you can help the ecosystem around you become happier and healthier.
All right, so there was a lot in that video. So we're going to break it down a little bit more to look at those parts. So ecosystems. So a reminder that they are all the plants, animals, microorganisms, chemicals, and environmental features that exist together in a community in a particular place. So all the living things, plants, the animals, the bacteria, fungi, and the non-living things, the water, soil, air, light, minerals, rocks. The living things are broken down into producers, consumers, and decomposers, which the video mentioned and gave us some great examples, and we're going to look at that a little bit closer. So producers are the organisms that create food from inorganic matter. So they're able to create their own food. The best examples of producers are plants, lichens, and algae, which convert water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide into carbohydrates, so into the energy that they need. So this happens both on land, in water, and also there's some bacteria that do this, that are producers as well. Then we have consumers. So consumers are organisms that cannot create their own food. So they need to consume, they need to eat something else. So they consume the food generated by producers or consume other organisms that have in turn consumed producers. So many insects and animals are consumers. So if we think about the types of consumers, so there's the herbivore, which only eats plants. So rabbits, chickens, deer, moose, there's tons of herbivores. But also think about like small fish. I do not know my fish very well, but like minnows, which would eat algae or small plankton. There are small herbivore type animals in water as well. Then we have the carnivores, which only eat animals. So some of them are like spiders, which don't make their own food. They eat other insects. Then lynx. I'm trying to think of local animals that I know that are carnivores. I would assume bigger fish. Again, I don't know fish very well, so I don't know if walleye only eat smaller fish and don't eat algae or other water plants. Foxes, wolves, these are carnivore animals that eat other animals. Then we have omnivores, which eat both plants and animals. So Bears are a great example. As we know, they eat berries, but also will eat fish and other small animals if they come across them. We humans generally are omnivores. Some folks choose to be vegans or vegetarians and might fall more under the herbivore category. Generally, folks cannot just be carnivores. We need the nutrients from plants as well. We can't just get what we need from meat. So you might eat more meat than other folks, but we humans generally need both plants and animals protein to survive. And then we have scavengers, which eat the bodies of dead organisms. So vultures are the example in the picture, and things like that, which might also, like bears or foxes, or like sometimes things like that come across other kills and eat those. So we have, thinking about the producers and consumers, there's various levels, right? So we talked about how, so the producer is a primary producer. So in the grassland, on the ground, so grass would be the primary producer. It's taking in sun and water and nutrients from the soil to grow. And then a grasshopper is a primary consumer, so it's eating the grass. And then the secondary consumer is a rat. A rat is eating the grasshopper. So it's not eating any grass, not eating any plants. It's just eating the grasshopper, which ate the plants. And then a snake is a tertiary, so a third level consumer who eats the rat, because the rat ate the grasshopper and the grasshopper ate the grass, so it gets the nutrients from those. And then the hawk, which is a quaternary, it's a fourth level consumer, eats the snake. So there's various levels of consumers. Producers, there's just are one level, or they're just producing the same from the soil, the earth, the water, the sunlight. But they also have them on, like, so there's algae, which then is eaten by mosquito larvae, which is then eaten by dragonfly larvae, which is then eaten by fish, which is then eaten by raccoon. Or in the ocean, phytoplankton is a producer, which is eaten by zooplankton, which is eaten by fish, which is eaten by a seal, which is eaten by a white shark. So there's various levels of these producers and consumers. The consumers are, there's a lot more consumers that eat different, either eat other consumers or eat producers. And then finally, we have the decomposers. So the decomposers break down dead or dying organic matter. So the examples of decomposers include detritus feeders such as earthworms and sow bugs, as well as some fungi and bacteria. Some scavenger animals can also be thought of as decomposers opposed to consumers. So really, the ones that we're going to think about most are the bacteria, insects, worms, fungi, things that are breaking down our dead matter and returning it to the soil. So a healthy ecosystem produces its own food, it consumes that food, and then is able to recycle the waste that comes from those activities. So, right, because consumers create waste when they eat producers. And so being able to deal with both the dead matter and the waste matter, because dead matter from the producers also die at some point too. They don't necessarily are all consumed when they're alive. And so how does that all cycle? How do we end up getting new life from dead matter? So that oxygen is one example of something that cycles through the system. So the plant takes in, through photosynthesis, takes in the oxygen, and through sunlight takes in the oxygen, takes in carbon dioxide and uses that oxygen from animals breathing, from decomposition being released, from industrial combustion, so releasing it because we're burning things. So we take in that carbon dioxide and release the oxygen into the air. And then the animals can breathe that in, oxygen in. So and then if they die, they decompose and they go into the soil. The nutrients go back into the soil, which the plants then take up and use in the soil, or potentially can be burned if they are able to turn into fuel. The same thing with plants. When plants decompose and die and decompose, they go back into the soil and things are released back into the air. So it's a cycle. Oxygen is just one example of the nutrients that cycle through. Carbon is another example of things that get cycled through. So we think about our plant here. Our tree is our producer. So it takes the carbon and gives it back into the, takes it out of the air and grows. That's part of how it grows. And so then animals breathe out the carbon and decompose. And so then their carbon goes into the soil, but then they also eat. How they get, part of how they get carbon is they eat it off of the trees and the plants. So then they get that carbon back into their system, which is becoming gathered from the photosynthesis. And then the decaying, when plants decay, it goes back into the soil. And then the soil can pull it up, other plants, and it cycles through. So carbon is another example of how things cycle through. And then finally, we have nitrogen. So we have our plants, our producers, are pulling nitrogen out of the soil through nitrates. Remember, there's lots of nitrogen in the earth, or sorry, in the air, but we can't breathe it in. See, the little rabbit example is not be able to take it at all. So bacteria takes it, and through various stages, which we don't need to know the stages, decomposers and bacteria break it down and return it to the soil, and then the soil, then the plants can then pull it into the plants, into the producers, and then the consumers then eat the plants and the producers and get the nitrogen that we need. Then we have a phosphorus cycle. So these are all examples of minerals, of nutrients that we need and how we get them, because we're not just like chewing on a chunk of phosphorus. So it's absorbed by the plants, by the producers from the soil, and then it gets incorporated. Animals eat the producers, and then when they decompose and their waste, they go back into the soil, but then also comes off of rocks. So rocks are weathered and things change, and so then that phosphorus goes in either through the water or it goes into the ground and then get pulled in by the plants from the water and the ground in order to cycle it in through what we need as consumers. And finally, sulfur. The sulfur cycle is another element that we need and continues. So sulfur is extracted from the air, the atmosphere, and it falls into acid rain or snowfall and weathers rocks. And then that goes into our water and into our soil and ends up in our ground, in our soil. So then plants can take those sulfates that it needs. Bacteria processes them, changes them into things that are actually useful for animals. So animals then eat the plants. Humans eat the plants, we get the sulfur that we need in order to survive. And then our waste when we die, we decay, we return to the soil and decompose, and the nitrogen cycles around again. So all of those cycles we're not thinking about what's going on, but those cycles are happening and we are benefiting from them. So a well-balanced ecosystem can support themselves indefinitely if they are not disturbed. So if an ecosystem's in a happy, thriving state, then they're good to go. They don't need anything out from the outside. They can go on maintaining healthy levels of substances by producing, consuming, and decomposing, which is great. Healthy ecosystems do really, really well. They keep themselves healthy. So then we need to talk about human activities, and this is where everything changes. Humans are introduced and everything changes. So human activity generally upsets ecosystem cycling. Waste from farming livestock releases large amounts of ammonium into the soil. This is one example. So this is going to happen. Animals release ammonium into the soil. That's normal. But because we farm and we have large amounts of livestock in one area, then we're releasing large amounts of ammonium into the soil. So the nitrogen and the ammonium and the nitrates easily dissolve in the water in the area. And then extra nitrogen in the water can be toxic to aquatic organisms. So that extra nitrogen that is added into the water kills the plants in the water. And then also extra nitrogen in the soil makes plants grow too fast. So the plants are like, oh, this is great. I've got lots of what I need. And I grow really fast, which means they're not strong. They're not growing strong, and slowly they shoot up and then they're weak. So farming practices can strip nitrates, phosphates, and organic material from the soil. So then this causes erosion and acidic soils. This leads to desertification, where fertile soil becomes unable to support plant life. So either having too much ammonium and nitrogen into the soil is not good, but also stripping nitrogen and nitrates out of the soil is not good. So it's really quite complicated. The things happen naturally, that balance happens naturally, and human activities can either have too much or too little of something and really change the health of the ecosystem. So in terms of human activities, we are not great with producers, consumers, and decomposers. So we don't produce, as humans, we don't produce things naturally. We can't take things from the earth and the soil and the air and the sunlight and water and create food. We can't do that. We extract lots of things, but we aren't creating anything when we're extracting. Then we consume. We are excellent consumers. We consume all sorts of things. So much. We consume. And with that consumption, we create pollution. We create waste. We consume the producers, sometimes faster than they can reproduce, and we create waste and pollution. But we don't have a good decomposers. So we recycle a little bit, but to the extent of our consumption, we do not have anything that is able to return that the things that we've extracted from the earth. We don't have any way to return it back into the earth, really. We try a little bit, but overall, we are really just consumers, and we are human impacts. We do not produce anything, and we do not decompose anything. So we're not returning anything back into the soil except for waste and pollution. So we can think about this human activity system as an open-ended system. So we just keep going. We keep going on forever, whereas a natural system is a loop. It comes back on itself, right? So the producers get something from the decomposers. And so that's a cycle. It goes around and around. If we think about all those cycles we just looked at, it goes around and around. It never ends. It is able to support itself. Whereas human systems, we don't. We just take and we create waste, but we don't deal with the waste, and we don't actually create anything. We're just taking from what the nature creates. So this is pretty concerning. So example of producers we can sort of say is that we support, we grow crops and we drill for fossil fuels. That's kind of equivalent of producing, but we're not actually creating anything. Consumers, we consume food and we purchase and use products. We do that really well. And decomposers, we can kind of think about sewage treatment plants and metal recyclers a little bit, but they really don't decompose and return back to the natural state to the extent of which we consume. So let's compare a little bit more the natural ecosystems and the human activity systems. So natural ecosystems, a reminder, are organic plant and animal matter is biodegradable. So decomposers, sunlight, and oxygen can break them down completely into reusable minerals and nutrients. Everything that's in that system gets reused. Whereas human activity systems, we do not have efficient decomposers. Much of what we produce and consume is not biodegradable. It just exists forever. And when we no longer use something, it becomes waste and therefore pollutant. We don't have a way to return it back to the soil, to the earth. But our systems are interconnected. We don't live in parallel, we live interconnected, we entwine together. So the real problem is that Earth's decomposers cannot recycle all the waste that is created by humans, because Earth's decomposers try, but there's no way that they can cycle everything through. So looking at one example, a little bit about what humans are doing to try to change this and be aware and try to live more sustainably is biosolids is an example. So we create a lot of waste. And biosolids are one way that people are trying to deal with our literal waste, our poop. So we're attempting to take something that has a large negative, unsustainable impact, our poop, and turn it into a sustainable, positive influence on our environment. So we're trying to learn how to be decomposers. Not us physically, but like using technology. So we're going to watch another couple of videos about biosolids to learn a little bit about what it is that to try to change and become better decomposers and dealing with our waste in a better way. All right, here we go.
Your poop is used to grow food or plants for our region.
Now, where does this all begin? In your house.
Most of us, every single day, we take it for granted. We flush our toilet. What happens to it? I don't know.
So every time that you flush your toilet, you are making a donation to make a fertilizer to grow plants somewhere in our region.
So, all that goes down into the sewer lines to our wastewater treatment plants.
The wastewater treatment plant receives your sewage. We're able to pull off that poop and food, essentially, and send it to its own part of the wastewater treatment plant.
Those solids that are removed from the water waste stream are turned into what is known as a biosolid, which is a nutrient-rich fertilizer used for agricultural purposes.
Using biosolids helps us return carbon back to the soil and helping us to fight climate change.
It also helps plants to grow bigger faster, which helps pull even more carbon out of the atmosphere.
We're able to put the amendment out there that builds that soil. It's making it just a healthier environment to grow wheat in.
It also holds in water.
And it also is an alternate to synthetic fertilizer. Synthetic fertilizer requires a lot of energy to create. So it's offsetting all of those energy demands.
Of course there's an ick factor. You go, oh, poop, that's turned into something else, and we put it on gardens. People at first are like, ugh, when they hear about that. Things are broken down and little magic bacteria come in and they turn what is poop and food into biosolids and fertilizer.
Being able to produce a renewable resource from our wastewater is so important because it's an endless resource. So we're taking these nutrients from the earth and we're able to actually put those back. So it's a very sustainable organic process.
And being able to make people aware of what happens when they flush their toilet or take a shower, then saying this waste can be turned into a renewable resource, people are just blown away. It's amazing.
And I think that is probably the best story that we have when it comes to talking about our wastewater treatment process.
So that's one example of, or one video about an area that does this. And just in terms of thinking about the ick factor, the reality is that our soil already is like waste, death, like dead animals, dead plants, poop from animals and plants is already being turned into our soil. That's what bacteria, that's what worms, that's what the decomposers are already doing. And so this is just humans replicating that same process with human poop. All right. But of course, there's some concerns, and we want, when we're making decisions on grants, to make sure that we are thinking ahead. And so this video continues to talk about biosolids, which seems like a really interesting idea, but also a little bit of what some of the concerns are as well.
To those of you who saw The Martian and walked away wondering if you could actually use astronaut poop to help you grow potatoes on Mars, the answer is yes. You can also use astronaut poop to grow things back on Earth, or just any person. And while that might sound a little gross, we humans have been using our own feces for fertilizer for thousands of years. And we are still doing it through what are called biosolids, solids from wastewater that have been processed to make them safer. There are actually a lot of ecological benefits to using biosolids, so some experts argue we should be using more of them. But questions about their safety remain, so researchers are still studying how best to recycle our poop. The danger with feces, be it cow or chicken or human, is that they can contain some nasty pathogens. That's because many microbes and parasites have evolved to spend their lives in other critters' guts and move between hosts via the fecal-oral route. Which is, I don't need to explain that, right? If nothing is done to kill those off, then they could end up on any crops that use manure for nourishment. And that is a real good way to start an E. coli or salmonella outbreak. So if you want to safely use human poop as fertilizer, you first have to make sure that disease-causing bacteria and parasites are dead. The traditional way to do that is composting, which is when you let a massive heap of wet waste from living things, just vegetable peels, chicken bones, even poop, just sit around until it's broken down by bacteria, worms, and fungi. Well, not just sit there. You have to mix it occasionally to aerate it so our decomposing buddies can get the occasional influx of oxygen needed to continue breaking the stuff down. That process generates a surprising amount of heat. A compost pile can get up to around 71 degrees Celsius, which is enough to at least kill off most of the pathogens, assuming you're doing it right. Which means, in theory, you could make fertilizer from human poop on Mars, or just at home. And yes, there are people who do this. There are special toilets for it and everything. But most people in the US leave biosolids production to sewage treatment plants. Commercial biosolids produced from wastewater are regulated by the EPA. Anything derived from human waste that's destined to be fertilizer must have a virtual absence of pathogens according to the agency's standards. So these biosolids tend to undergo both biological treatments, similar to composting, and sterilization procedures, though there are several different methods used. A 2017 study estimated that publicly owned sewage treatment centers produce around 7.2 million tons of biosolids every year, half of which makes its way onto farms. That is a lot of processed poop, but it's only about half of the total amount of solids that the facilities produce. The rest remained as sewage sludge, which has to be disposed of through incineration or in landfills. And less than 1% of US farms fertilize with them. So we could potentially ramp up the use of biosolids by quite a lot. The biggest reason to do this would be that biosolids are so green. Instead of sewage ending up in waterways or landfills, it gets repurposed to resupply depleted soil with nutrients. Recycling for the win! And pound for pound, biosolids are also generally cheaper to make than synthetic fertilizers. Together, that means they could make the biggest difference in countries that struggle with sanitation. By composting human waste, countries could make cheap fertilizer and improve the health of their citizens at the same time. A win-win. But they'd also be pretty great in the US or anywhere really, because their disposal is costly and harms the environment. So by recycling, sewage treatment plants save money and help Mother Nature. But while the upsides are clear, there are scientists and organizations that are wary of the idea. The issue isn't the gross factor, it's what else ends up down the drain, like pharmaceutical compounds, cleaning agents, and heavy metals. While biosolids are considered heavily regulated, those regulations don't cover absolutely everything that could potentially harm us. And studies have shown that such concerns aren't completely without merit. A 2009 EPA survey found traces of pharmaceuticals, steroids, and flame retardants in various treatment plants' biosolids samples. And a 2012 study found that earthworms in biosolid-treated soil had taken in pharmaceuticals and other stuff like disinfectants from antibacterial hand soaps. But it's unknown if this actually harms the worms or could harm us. Even the lead researcher on the worm study called the risks speculative, while the benefits of using biosolids were clear. There's also the risk that biosolids could promote superbugs, microbes that are resistant to multiple or all known antibiotics. Resistance is a concern whenever microbes are exposed to levels of antibiotics below what kills them outright. And that can happen with biosolids because many of the antibiotics we take end up in our urine and feces. We know that resistant bacteria are found in sewage and sludge prior to the treatment process to make biosolids, and sometimes after, depending on the method used. So it's possible that these bacteria or their genes could be spread when biosolids are used or produced. But some methods seem to be better at killing these bugs than others, so scientists need more information about what works best and why. That way they can find ways to recycle our poop without contributing to the growing problem of antibiotic resistance. So we just have to collect more data, not poop. We've got plenty of poop. There are also efforts to find other safe uses for biosolids, like a coalition of agencies in the San Francisco Bay Area looking into using them to generate electricity. Biosolids could be turned into biofuels, cutting down on our need for oil, or even be converted into building materials for some seriously eco-friendly housing. No plans in the works for Martian compost piles yet, though. I guess we're just gonna have to wait for Elon Musk on that one. Thank you for watching this episode of SciShow. If you want to better understand sewage treatment, you might want to check out our episode on what happens to your pee and your poop after you flush.
Right. So I really like that video because it gives us a wealth of understanding of both the benefits, the things that are really great about biosolids, but also the concerns and how we need to continue to get more research done. So a little bit more about how we dispose of biosolids, because these already exist. So it's not something that is new. We already are dealing with biosolids. We already poop. So we have to deal with it. So right now they're dumped in landfills. The nutrients then cannot cycle through the ecosystem because they're contained in or surrounded by non-biodegradable materials. So they just become waste. They are burned as fuel, so then are releasing carbon and other chemicals into the air, which isn't great because that contributes to the climate crisis. They're dumped into oceans, which then is damaging. It changes the water ecosystem. So this is not healthy. And then they're also starting to be used to revive and fertilize soils. So this is maybe the best solution, like from the videos it sort of seems, but there's still concerns about heavy metals, drugs, and other toxic substances in the biosolids. So we're still learning and trying to research about this. So how biosolids could be used to revive eroded soils. So when the top layer of soils have been mined for metals or minerals have become damaged, strip mining causes erosion and makes soils too acidic to support plant life. Biosolids have been used to treat these soils, neutralizing them, halting erosion, and thus stopping toxic chemicals from running into the groundwater. They can also be used as crop fertilizer. So biosolids are being used as fertilizer for crop soils and in compost mixtures as people try to find ways to sustainably deal with biosolids. Pathogens and potentially harmful heavy metals are still a concern, as not all biosolids are quote unquote clean as other things. So effective sewage treatment systems are essential for the production of safe, usable biosolids. So this is really, really important. Biosolids are one way of improving decomposers in the human activity system that affects ecosystems. However, we're still studying and learning, so we must be careful about what we introduce into the environment. We don't want to make the situation worse. All right, so now you are able to answer the key questions on page 34. You have the check for understanding questions 1 and 2. All right, so that was our lesson for cycling of substances in ecosystems. So just a reminder, let's go through the highlights. Ecosystems contain both non-living elements and living elements. Specifically, we really delve into what producers, consumers, and decomposers are within ecosystems and how they are a loop where they are able to support life and the cycle so that they're really well balanced. We talked about the interconnected cycles of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, and how the producers, consumers, and decomposers cycle these important elements through Earth systems. And we talk about biosolids and what they are and how they are treated, how they are helpful, and what are the concerns about biosolids. Really focusing on the fact that dealing with biosolids, and this is one example of how humans are working to become better decomposers, because we are awful decomposers. We cannot be producers. We can support producers, and we are excellent consumers, but how this is a really problematic cycle within our Earth. So our success criteria, you can give examples of producers, consumers, and decomposers in both natural and human ecosystems. You can explain the negative impacts of human activities on ecosystems, and you can explain the steps humans are taking to manage our impacts in more sustainable ways. So what are we doing to try to make a difference? So now you can do the review questions on page 35, questions 1 through 6. There's not too many for this chapter. All right, so that is our lesson number 4 today for our science class. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out and contact me. You can call me at the office at 807-737-1488, extension 2209, or toll free at 1-800-667-3703. You can email me at bronwyn.slate, and that's spelled bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca, or connect with me through Facebook at bslatewahsa. Reminder that our YouTube channel, my YouTube channel is bslatewahsa as well, and all of our lessons are uploaded under the playlist SVN3E. And I also have supplementary videos. So the videos that we watched today in class are there as well. So you can find them from their original sources, which means that if you have more interest, if you're interested in looking into those things a little bit more, you can get information about those videos as well as other videos that those channels produce. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a lovely day, and we'll